Great. So yeah, my name is Robert Lehman. I'm the program manager for Cedar Commissions. So I've done it for the last 3 years. And I shadowed Alana 4 years ago. So seen it through like the pandemic phase, and then coming back out of that, and then having this last year, which was more of like a return back to a normal programming concert. So yeah, there have been a lot of developments with it that I'll talk about later. So let's go through here. Plan for the webinar, we'll do just a little bit of an introduction about the Cedar, just some context about the Cedar Commissions. Then we'll go to what artists do, what artists receive as part of the Cedar Commissions, who's eligible. We'll do a brief question break, and then we'll do an overview of the application. I do want to say that a lot of the text that is up here, it is very similar to the text that you'll find on the call for artists. So I'm not going to read through everything up there. And we'll have this PowerPoint available afterwards too. So don't feel like you need to like write everything down. Just write down the things that feel important, which is sometimes hard to decide on. Okay, so the Cedar, the mission of the Cedar Cultural Center. Oh, sorry. That was just when I was supposed to start. Yeah, the mission of the Cedar Cultural Center is to promote intercultural appreciation and understanding through the presentation of global music and dance. So as 4 parts of that, we're committed to artistic excellence and integrity, diversity of programming, community outreach, and support for emerging artists. And so Cedar Commissions really falls into that last part. It's one of the primary ways, including like booking like local artists headlining shows, like booking local artists, opening up for touring artists. But yeah, Cedar Commissions is more of our like mentoring development, like incubator for 6 local artists. So we'll talk about what the Cedar Commissions are. So commission 6 early career Minnesotan composers, can be all from the state of Minnesota. We have some people apply from places like Duluth, Bemidji, St. Cloud. Yeah. And they write about 30 minutes of new music. Sometimes people take that a little generously, like an hour of new music. But yeah, they create it and then they perform it on the Cedar stage in February. Since the program's launch, we've commissioned over 60 artists of a bunch of different styles. And from the beginning, Cedar Commissions has been funded by Jerome Foundation. So yeah, they really focus on developing early career artists. And we're grateful for that. They actually gave us an increase in funding last year. So I'll tell you a little bit about that a couple slides in. Yeah, so as I said before, creating 30+ minutes of new music. And that's defined as music that's never been written before, not composed, recorded, or performed. Sometimes people are like, oh, can I incorporate like one of these songs? And like, if it's something that like you've had like privately, there's flexibility there. But I do want to encourage you to think of it as like, okay, what's totally brand new? Like sometimes people are like, okay, I've already released this song. Like, can I build on it? And I would say like, no, it needs to be something new. Yeah. And then you're required to attend 5 cohort meetings. And so those vary different topics. Sometimes it'll be like a tech talk where it's like, here are all the different things that the lighting system is capable of. Here's how the sound system works. Tell us what your tech needs are. Like, let's troubleshoot this in a meeting. So that kind of development. Sometimes it's more creative, collaborative conversations about like, hey, I'm running into like having writer's block. Like, what do you all do to like deal with writer's block? And then this last year, we started to do some more mentoring about like just kind of music industry. So booking shows, like how to pitch yourself well, online presence, stuff like that. So, and then it really is a chance for the cohort to come together, because it really is like 6 artists that are coming together, working on parallel projects, but there's some of it where folks come together too and support each other. Carlisle, do you want to talk about that maybe a little bit? I don't know.
Sure. About the artists coming together.
Yeah, like the cohort meetings.
Yeah. That was one of the most significant parts of the experience for me. I didn't know any of the other artists in my cohort before the Cedar Commissions, and it was incredible to meet these other artists and learn about their crafts and their work, all of which was incredible, and like it really enriched my experience in this community. Those connections did. It and like finding like so many different commonalities in our work was really enlivening. Like there were a couple of the artists that, like, the topics, the content that we typically like are exploring in our art, and just like our approach. Like I tend to take a really theatrical approach to what I make, and there were a couple of other artists that also take very theatrical approaches, but in different ways. And so it was really fun to connect and talk about our processes that way. And yeah, and learn how others approach their creative process, and think about how like those ideas could work for you as well. Like to sort of change up the way that you are approaching your project. Like I definitely like listened a lot to everyone's description of how their project was going. Like it helped me keep my own like thinking fresh and get out of my like creative ruts a little bit. And then it was so cool to just like be really proud of what we all made together at the end of it. Like I felt like yeah, we were like a little crew by the end of it. Good.
Yeah, you all were a really tight cohort.
Yeah.
It's fun to see that come together. It's like the perfect ingredients.
Yeah. And since then I've continued to work in various capacities, like with some of the people that I had that I was in cohort with. So yeah, it's definitely enriched like my own performative sense.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carlisle. The last little bullet on here is that you'll participate in a wrap-up meeting. And so that includes an evaluation survey. That's just what we give to Jerome to tell them about the cohort experience, artist experience. So $5,000 tuition, that's up 20%. Think of that as like using it for any additional tech that you might need. If you need to rent like a very specific piece of equipment, you can also use that towards paying your performers. Yeah. If you needed to like buy set pieces, like sometimes people do that as well. You'll have a $250 artistic mentorship stipend to work with a mentor. It could be somebody that you're already connected with, or we can connect you with a mentor too. And then you'll have administrative and marketing support from Cedar staff. So I was talking a little bit about like the tech side of things, or like mentoring on like the booking side of things, stuff like that. On the marketing support side, they'll work with you in terms of thinking about like who's your current audience, where do you want to look for new audiences. Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really excited about, like two new things, is that we're able to offer like high quality edited video since last year. Yeah, last year was the first year that we were like guaranteed to have that. And then audio recording as well. So before, artists would have had to like hire in their own videographers and also have to pay for audio recording, but that's just built in documentation for applying for future grants. And then you also have a built-in full tech rehearsal. So that was something where it's like, we had it as optional before because certain artists like had played the Cedar before, they'd played many shows in other venues, and so they didn't feel like they needed it. But I don't know, it's just like every artist who did a tech rehearsal, like their performance was so much more spot on than the artists who decided not to do that. So we just decided, you know, just like we'll use some of the other money to just automatically pay for that for the artists. And then Alexis, you were asking a question. We'll get to that in like the question break. Thanks for your question. Okay, so who's eligible? Applicants from all different genres, all different styles. Yeah, we're committed to supporting a diverse cohort of artists that reflects our like relationship with global music, our relationship with the community. Indigenous and people of color are encouraged to apply. You have to be an early career artist to be eligible. So I would think of this as like if you've ever gotten paid for a gig, right? And you want music to be a really core part of your life, or music already is a really core part of your life, or music is like everything that you do. Those would all be eligible. If you're somebody who's like already, I don't know, like headlined a show at like Fine album was featured on the Current and like all these different things, like you're touring regionally, like maybe this is probably not, it's probably not the opportunity for you. It's geared more towards artists that are in more emerging phase that haven't yet been recognized wider outside of that. And then you do have to apply as a lead artist. So sometimes people will ask like, hey, I'm in this band, can we apply to write new music? It has to be a lead artist that's leading that project. You can work with your band members, right? But it really needs to be like the vision of one artist. And I recognize that it's limiting the support to like a specific type of idea of like who the creator is or like who's leading the vision. And recognize that limitation. A lot of people work more collaboratively, either as like a full ensemble together, or as like a duo, like leading a project. And like certainly we do want that collaboration, right? Like so like City last year was working with a beat maker, right? She didn't write the beats herself, but she rapped over it, right? And like orchestrated the whole show. And so I think the main point about that is just it needs to be the vision, the main singular vision of like one artist, and whatever's going to get you there is good, you know. Just avoid like being like my band wants to write new music. This is not the one for that. You have to live in the state of Minnesota, and then full-time and degree seeking students aren't eligible for Cedar Commissions. And then for past Cedar Commissions alumni, if you still haven't come out of that emerging artist phase, you can apply again. And that's you have to wait for 2 rounds after your commission year. So Carlisle, I think you wouldn't be eligible for this one, but you would be eligible the next round, unless you blow up super big, which is going to happen. So this is our first question point. Yeah, so I don't know, take a second, think of questions. Alexis had just asked a question here. If it's a project, and so yeah, I would think of it as a project. It's like trying to think of a concise example. V Bohem was working on a project 2 years ago, or 2 cycles ago, and it was focused on her reflecting on what it felt like to be on edge during the pandemic, and really being at like the edge of your emotional capacity, mental capacity, and what things you can learn, and what that can spark. So she developed this piece where she was standing on like stiletto heels and singing in the middle of this like raised box that was significantly elevated above the crowd. And so it had the crowd feeling a type of like, oh, is she gonna be okay? Like you're also on the edge of your seat as like an audience member. And so that was like the full project, you know. She wrote 30-40 minutes of music for that. I think of it more as like a project or like a collection, like a body of songs in that way that's like centered around a theme, or like tells a full story, versus like things that are like very disparate, unless that's core to your project, you know. Like if you can write a very articulate, like compelling idea about like these are why like these disparate elements are together or like put next to each other, that would work too. You just have to tell us the story. Yeah, and then Alexis, I think I need a little more clarity on the second part of your question. So Alexis was asking like, what if we haven't been signed by a record deal and recorded our original music through a recording app? Is that specifically thinking about whether you qualify as an emerging artist, or is that, are you asking like, would that music be eligible for like Cedar Commissions? I think I just need some clarity there. So I'll look in the chat for that. And then, yeah, that second question, like, does that mean 2 years later? It would mean actually like 3 years technically. Because it's like you would have your round and then you'd wait for the next round and then the next round and then the round after that. So yeah.
Find a mentor, does that mentor have to also be a Minnesota artist?
No, your mentor does not have to live in Minnesota. The question was like, well, question was if your mentor has to live in Minnesota and they don't. So
250 for the take through that.
yeah, we'll pay it to you and then you'll pay them. Yep. Alexis, yeah, you can come off mute. Just ask the question.
Yeah, so in the last couple slides, it was saying something about like new music, like it can't be recorded or so I'm an independent artist. I like upload my own self with like a studio app with my music because I don't have a record deal. So I'm just, you know, still very new, and that's why I asked that question. Like when it said new music, like are you referring to like, oh, like I can't have a record deal? Or like, would it be okay if I like uploaded new music on YouTube through a recording app, studio app? Like, I don't know if those two are the same things.
Yeah, I'd say it would need to be all brand new music, like music that you haven't composed before already, right? So anything that like, no matter where it's uploaded, like I would encourage you to think about like creating brand new music for this project. Yeah, in terms of like releasing the music ahead of time, we ask that the artist wait to release it until like the show. Like the show would be the debuting of that work. Some artists have done like teaser tracks, which can be like a helpful promotional tool. So that's okay. But really want to think of like the Cedar Commissions being like, that's like when these new artists share their new works with everybody for the first time. Yeah, cool. Any other questions at this moment? All right, great. Carlisle, anything that you want to chime in on at this moment?
I don't know if I have the question formulated fully, but on that topic of creating new music, I'm just wondering about like remixing and sampling something from your like past work, or like I think that in my year, I think some of like maybe one of the songs that V performed as part of her piece was like in some way substantially reworking something that had already been done previously. And I'm just wondering, like, I know that those lines are so wishy-washy, but I'm just curious about like situations like that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think with V, it was reworked to the point where it felt like it had significantly changed. So like I think if you're coming in like, hey, I have these 8 tracks that like I'm thinking about as this project, and I've already recorded them, like I've already recorded the ideas for it, it's probably not going to be a great fit for the Cedar Commission. I think of a period of time as like you really developing the new music. Some of it can be like ideas from the past, but I mean, you know, and it's like everything's with a grain of salt. It's like I say the rigid thing, right? And then it falls somewhere, you know, somewhere on the spectrum.
I like create original content using sample material that I think would be allowed. That's original. That's of course that's in that gray area of what's new versus what's old, but like no, those are modified and used in a way that's completely unique and absolutely different.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, we're getting to the next section. This is talking about like the application process. So these are the things that you'll need to submit by Thursday, June 29th at 11:59 p.m. You will need a Google email account, just as a heads up. We're doing the application process just slightly different than last year. Last year's people would just submit the documents via email. This time you're submitting them via a form. So up to 2 pages or 3 minutes of video describing your project, talking about what your project idea is, how feasible your project is, and how it's going to change your career as an artist. Like which way is it going to take you? What are the things that you're exploring as part of the commission that are taking you to places that you want to go? So for each of these bolded parts, we want to hear how you're going to push yourself, how you're going to stretch yourself. For each artist, that's going to look different, and I'll share a couple examples later. We also want to hear about how it's going to help you explore new territory, new ideas, or working with people. A lot of times people will push themselves to work with new collaborators. And that's something that feels like very rich. Like I know that Joe Kellen was working with like a projectionist and a puppeteer. That was like something that they really wanted as part of their project. And then we also want to hear why this work is artistically relevant. And so that's at a couple of different scales. You can think of that on a personal scale, like why is this story extremely important to you? Like if I was doing a piece on like suffering from like a chronic hand injury, right? That's something that like I experienced personally. It's like I would articulate why that reflection is important in my life. And what would make it stronger is if I made a case for why, okay, here's why it's relevant, both to like people who experience like chronic hand injuries outside of that, but then like also expanding it to like, oh, how's this relevant to a larger community? And there's a fine line there. You don't want to go so grandiose, like, oh, this project is going to solve world hunger, right? Like that's not what we're looking for. We just want to hear from you context around the piece, just letting us know why it's important. And then, yeah, one of the things that people will sometimes come to is they'll write us a project about like fully focusing on like recording a new album. And while you can do that as part of Cedar Commissions, I want applicants to think about it as like this whole period should be geared on that creation and that live performance of the new music. Recording can be part of that. But if your main project is like, yeah, I want to like record a new album and have it released, that's not going to fare super well, right? We want to hear more about like, this is what I'm envisioning for the live space. These types of moods. I want audience members to feel this way. Yeah, this is how I want it to feel in space. And then certainly like there's exceptions. Like Ethiopian artist Fayise, she was playing a karar and she needed a special mic. And so it's like she used part of her budget to buy that special contact mic because we didn't have one of those at the Cedar. So cool. How feasible is your project? We look at 3 things. I forgot to bullet the third thing, but just a rough timeline of when you expect to complete certain parts of it, how you're going to budget the commission funds, and that can be the ways that you're going to pay yourself, pay your collaborators, small equipment purchases, like picking yourself up north for like a mini artist residency, if that's core to the project that you're working on. Certain artists have done that too. And then, yeah, thinking about it being stageable within like, 30 to 45 minute set here at the Cedar. And then the third thing is, in terms of how feasible your project is, the kind of shadow background to this is like having an understanding of your artistic background. So we want to see that you've worked on smaller projects leading up to this that show us that you would be able to tackle a project of what you're proposing. And this is just an example of like a sample budget. A lot of people will ask like, how do you budget? Like, what does a sample budget look like? It can look like really bare bones like this. I just included this as an example of like, oh, like the second saxophone player was also doing some writing and composing, collaborating with the lead artist. And so that's why they got paid a little bit more than the other ones who were rehearsing and performing, but not necessarily part of that creative process. Yes. So asking, we want to know like how this is going to further your goals as an artist. How's it going to help you develop? Things to think about, ways that you might push yourself. You could be exploring new sounds and modes. So like V was exploring that edge project. And that was something that was incorporating some of the things that she's done before, but taking a different angle on it and really focusing in on like the edge of sanity. Sophia she was one of the artists who took a residency up north for, I think it was a week, spending time in nature, listening to different nature sounds, and also thinking a lot about, feeling a lot about like how her body feels like in nature, and then composing music that wasn't necessarily like mimicking the nature sounds themselves, but like that an audience member would feel a similar way, like listening to that music as they do out in nature. So that was like a new, just like a new mode that she was exploring. It might be working with other collaborators. I was talking about Joe Kellen earlier. For Maddie Tees, she was working with some collaborators that she hadn't seen in a couple of years. And I think one of them flew in internationally. One of them flew in from LA. And so she used her project funds for them to be able to come here. Like they collaborated across distance, like sending each other files for the programming, or sorry, the commissioning period. But then they had that rehearsal week here. So it really was like, those were like the 3 people that she wanted to collaborate with. 4 people. 4 people that she wanted to collaborate with. A lot of people will take the Cedar Commissions as like, this is expanding instrumentation. So it's like, they might be a solo artist and it's like, I want to write for like a 5-piece orchestra or like 10-piece orchestra. Like sometimes it's like a running joke at the Cedar, like there's always like 1 artist per year that like, you're like, is everybody going to fit on stage? I don't know. We're going to run out of channels? I don't know. But it always feels like there's at least like 1 artist per year that like really wants to have that like maximal sound, which is a really cool thing to explore as artists. Yeah, Carlisle, I put you in that just in terms of like fleshing out the ensemble, but then also in terms of like diving deeply into more personal stories. Yeah, her city, she was exploring this practice of soul calling in Hmong shamanistic traditions of like using that and like remixing it a little bit to like call her soul back to herself after like all these different experiences and traumas that she had. By the end of it, it's like, oh yeah, I'm here, I'm me, I'm celebrating that. Cats was actually no, I'm going to skip Cats. Arams was a project focusing on oil and the effects of the petroleum industry in the Middle East, specifically in Iran, and composing music and including like archival historical footage that just kind of articulates or explores the way that oil influences like life and can be this like kind of like underground, like very destructive, very powerful force, very sludgy textures. Yeah, it was cool. Like combined a lot of like garage, like house, like jungle, electronic music. It's cool. Yeah, Carlisle, I don't know if do you want to talk a little bit about the way that your project pushed yourself?
Sure. So I'll talk about like the 2 sort of impetuses or whatever, the 2 things that 2 like tracks that I was sort of following with the project. I wanted to explore, my ancestral stories, the stories from my family lineages, and find the queer narratives that are there. Knowing that like they have to exist, but they're probably under so many layers of just like of repression, of expungement, of all of those things. So I wanted to sort of like take the family narratives that have been passed down to me and like crack them open and like find those stories, reimagine some characters, discover new characters in my history, things like that. And in parallel to that, I was really fascinated with the just like the idea of musical storytelling and bardism. So like the way that the like historical, like pretty specifically like Western European role of a bard is to like carry mythologies and tell them in song. And so I wanted to explore that role in a very queer way, and by pushing myself to just be like the vehicle of the story and just be the embodiment of the character and the story. And that meant not playing an instrument, which was something that I'd never done before. I'd always performed my own music with an instrument, and sometimes with a band, but like I was always playing an instrument as well. So it was, yeah, that was like pretty clear to me that my growth edge was going to be to explore what it meant to pass all of the music and accompaniment off to a band and just be free to perform and explore these characters that I was not inventing, but these characters that I was embodying through the songs. Yeah.
Cool. I feel like one of the ways that the like bard element also came together was through like there were certain songs that felt like very much in like a Welsh bard tradition.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the way that it was composed.
Yeah. I tried to like for a couple of the songs go that direction. And then there were others that went totally other directions, which was really fun. It ended up being like a cabaret.
Yeah.
Which was kind of fun.
Yeah. With costume changes as well. Yeah.
With costume changes, yeah.
And set changes too.
Yeah.
It was it's very good. A lot of times people will combine many of these different things, so growing in a lot of different areas. We also ask you to submit 1 page or 1.5 minute describing your artistry. 1.5 minute video describing your artistry. There's Carlisle. So we ask you to talk about your previous composition experience, previous performance experience, and any other relevant artistic and musical experience. Use your best judgment, right? You want to highlight the things that you want the panelists to see. And so sometimes it's helpful to like list every single thing. But then sometimes there's like things that like we don't need to know as a review panelist. So it's just like you're thinking about, not like super harshly, but if you say like took lessons with like Miss Trish at like age 4 years old, like that's too much detail, right? That would be me sharing too much detail about my own journey playing piano. But if you said like taking piano lessons for like the last 20 years, it's like, great, include that, you know. And then we asked for 2 audio and video work samples, totaling no more than 5 minutes. So you can have these either as like, you know, like 2-minute and 50-second chunks that you upload to Google Drive and then share that with us, or they can be already uploaded to Bandcamp. You just have to tell us amps. So like you're like, oh, listen from like 1 minute and 15 seconds to like 2 minutes and 33 seconds. And then for this other one, like listen to like about, you know, that one's like 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And that makes up your full 5. We also want to know like what your role was in it, just very briefly. Sometimes people will write us like way too much. Like they'll write us like a full page about like, oh, this is the way that I crafted this. And this is what I was thinking about this. That's not what we're asking for. We're just asking like, were you the composer? Like, did you play the guitar? Like, did you sing in this? Or you the lyricist? Somebody else wrote the drum part, right? Somebody else like wrote the guitar part. We just want to know that in terms of the work sample. And it's not required to be a demo of your project idea. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm proposing this project idea. I need to share with them something that's like a prototype of it. I wouldn't encourage you to think of it that way. I would just say, pick something that is going to show us that you can do the thing that you're proposing. And then how are artists chosen? So it's a review panel of local musicians, former Cedar Commissions artists, community members, certain trusted community members, members of the Cedar Artist Collective. Those are past members of the Cedar Artist Collective because we don't have a current one. And then Cedar staff as well. So all of these, all of this text here is stuff that's in the call for artists. So I'm not going to go through that. but those are the people who are going to be looking at each application, and each application is looked at, each application by each panelist. So sometimes with like search committees, it's like they'll have like panelists look at like 15 of the applications, and somebody else looks at 15 others, and somebody else looks at 15 others, and they call them from there. Each of the panelists looks at every single application and then rate them with a rubric. Yeah, and this stuff is also stuff that we were talking about before, just in terms of feasibility, emerging artists, work samples. All these questions are on the call for artists, so I'm not going to go into those in depth. Cohort members are going to be publicly announced August 14th, and then those selected will be notified if they receive a commission no later than August 8th. It's to be determined if the Cedar will provide feedback on applications. It's really subject to staffing capacity. So last year I intended to, and we weren't able to. Like there was too much stuff with onboarding our new booking director and keeping up with the pace of shows and Cedar Commissions that just like wasn't able to prioritize that. So yeah, and if there's no feedback, if you don't get chosen, it doesn't mean that it was a bad application. It doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It just means that it wasn't chosen for this, right? So I really encourage people to take time to like be like, I didn't get this, that's real. But then also think about why you wanted to do that idea in the first place, and like find some way to carry that forward, whether that's in future grant applications or whether that's just taking the kernel of the idea and moving that forward in some way. Yeah. And like there's so many different things in terms of who's selected. It's like the makeup of the selection panelists. It's like the makeup of the applicant pool for that year as well.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
On that note,
Mhm.
I think that 2021, the year that I was one of the artists,
Mhm.
I think that was the third or fourth
Oh yeah.
time that I'd applied,
Mhm.
and I think that each time I applied with a different project idea.
Mhm.
But like all the ones that the years that the proposal was rejected, it still ended up becoming something, like, or like living on in some way. And then I actually realized that like I was reflecting today, and the project that I did do for the Cedar Commissions, really the idea sort of like seeded back, like I think the first year that I applied for the Cedar Commissions, I had like it like went through many like conceptual iterations like between then and the actual thing. But yeah, I think the first year, the project that I applied for, like that idea kind of like rolled and snowballed into what I ended up doing for the Cedar Commissions. So yeah, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And it's like, I don't know, I think of it the way that like one of my acting teachers in college, she said that it's like whenever you audition, whenever you put yourself out there, it's like you're throwing a tennis ball over a building, and you just keep throwing tennis balls, and like you just hope that like someday like somebody's going to throw one of those tennis balls back, and you like never know when that's going to happen. But yeah, I remember reading your applications like 2 or 3 years. With and like spending time in different, like I think water systems or different biomes in Minnesota. And then I saw that you had found other funding for that in between in the year.
Yeah.
And that also was like a benefit to your application the next year, because it's like, oh, this person had a project idea, found a way to do it, and came back with another idea the next year. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see. Okay. Yeah. So Q&A. Yeah. And that can be questions for me. It can be questions about any of the stuff.
Like you one sort of perspective or take, or can it?
Mm.
Or like footage,
Mm.
other projects or
Like samples and stuff like that, like cut together.
yeah,
Yeah, it can be either way. So what's your name? Addison. Addison was asking if for the application video, if it should just be like one single take, or like edited together, just like, you know, you talking, or if you can incorporate like different like video clips and stuff like that. So you can do either. Like I've seen successful applications, people who've got the commission from doing one where it's like, yeah, they did edit it together, like different video scenes and different samples of like past work that they had done, to give us an idea of editing style. But then also ones where it's like, it's either just like one single take and they just go for it, they have it down, or they edit together, but it still is just like talking straight at the camera. We have one question coming in from the Zoom chat. Does there need to be a lot of focus on the visual aspect of the performance? I heard a lot of examples of people having fun in that area, which I'm not opposed to, but it's not my main priority usually. Yeah, if it's, I would say if it feels like it's something that is adding meaningfully to your project idea, like consider it, right? Consider it as a way that it can really to your performance, to your music. I think the caution there comes from like if the focus on that detracts from like your overall project idea or like your overall composition, if it's distracting from it, then that's where like maybe it wouldn't be a route. It, especially like, yeah, considering things that like you haven't tried before. Commissions is about growth.
So, yeah, obviously, the application be the real name, but people want to make like don't remember.
Trying to remember. Mike was asking if you perform under a artist alias name, or like your own name, is like there an issue there? And there's not. Yeah. Any other questions for me or Carlisle? Or also Carlisle, I have questions for you that I prepared.
Cool.
Thinking back on your Cedar Commission's experience, what are two main things that stood out to you?
Just with regards to the whole process.
I think in two areas. One, where you were at the beginning of it, like where that fell in your artist career. And then the ways that you felt like you grew the most.
Well, I think that as far as where it was at in my artistic journey, it feels really inseparable from the timing of it during the pandemic. Like it felt like this was really at the time, like I had not performed for like 2 years because of COVID stuff. And yeah, and just had like that sort of like fell away. And I was like really I was like craving like restarting this part of my life. And so in that sense, it was incredibly life-giving. Like this experience was incredibly life-giving because of that. And then but I think that I learned in terms of like just like compositionally or creatively, the project duration is both long and really short. Like say you have 6 months. Yeah, you have 6 months to go from basically nothing to performing it for a couple hundred people. And I learned a lot about pacing that, like, and just like how how to fit all of that in, what's feasible in those 6 months. I learned a lot about like how I work creatively, like how I can like keep ideas going and then hone them as well. And I learned a lot about trusting collaborators too. Because I mean, the collaborators that I chose that played in the band were phenomenal. And I don't think that like this is a one really big thing. It was the first experience that I had where I had the opportunity to choose collaborators I have funding obviously from the commission, but choose collaborators that like had a level of like such a level of professionalism with their craft that literally the first rehearsal we got together, I was so stressed about time because like we couldn't all get together until like the end of December. And I was so stressed about that time frame because it was so tight. And the first time we got together, like counted us in on the first song, and it was like, here we are, like the song is here. And it like made me, that was like, it was this like, oh, this type of feeling, it is possible and it exists. And like, that's like what I want to seek out in collaborators that that like bring such life to a project automatically. So like learning what to ask and look for in a collaborator on a project was a pretty big deal. And I think it also like massively changed my performance style because like even though like now like I do still perform while I'm playing an instrument as well, I think that the experience of performing in the way that I did for the Cedar Commissions was what I learned in like cultivating that has stuck with me and like been a big part of performances that I've done since then. Yeah.
Cool. Other questions folks have? All right. Well, I'm not seeing any in the Zoom either. Thank you all for being here. Best of luck working on your applications. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, follow-up questions. My email is on the Cedar website and rlayman@thecedar.org. Yeah, we're looking forward to receiving your applications. For everybody who's on the Zoom, I'll share Carlisle's application with you as well via a link. So, yeah. All right. Thanks for being here. Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks everybody on the Zoom.
Thanks.
Thank you.